So today we have Metro Exodus, the third installment of the Metro series, the first two being of course Metro 2033 and Metro Last Light, all three games developed by 4A Studios. The series up until now has been predominantly well known as a sort of decent but rough and ready first-person shooter, with elements of the supernatural and elements of the survival horror genre. They're often quite dark and claustrophobic experiences. In my opinion on the previous installments, they were pretty standard first-person shooters, slightly rugged, slightly clunky, but that didn't necessarily take away from the experience. Instead, it gave it its own texture. Metro's unique selling point, so to speak, and some would argue, myself included, its strength, came from its whole premise. Factions and lives confined to the Metro, gas masks, radiation, bullets as a currency. It was really strong world building. So what's interesting about Metro Exodus is how far the game actually removes itself from the central pillar of its previous games. What's remarkable is how well the game manages to keep the key sensations of being in these dark and damp, cramped places throughout the game, making you consider whether it was a limitation all along. The story begins with you being out on patrol, listening equipment in hand, hoping to hear some outside transmissions, whereby you are ambushed by outsiders using a car, something completely out of the ordinary and shocking, left for dead. You learn that the world as you know it has been a lie, and there is a living world beyond the Metro. People you've trusted you discover have been keeping things from you, and now that you know this secret, people don't want it to get out, and so you are forced to escape everything you've known so long with your ragtag squad of Spartans. And this is what the theme of Metro becomes. Previously, Metro has never been afraid to tackle some quite complex ideas, ideological and political ones especially, but this time it becomes a somewhat more straightforward and simpler narrative, simply a search for a home, somewhere safe, freedom. And some actually might see this as an indication of something getting worse and less complicated. But actually, I think this really is a case of less is more. The stripping back of quite a lot of things gives it a more focused game, where you remember that the previous games had all those complicated politics and factions, on top of squeezing in a massive amount of the supernatural. You could argue it was somewhat over-seasoned. That's not to say that the characterful factions aren't missed at all, because you do wonder what's happened to all of that. However, much like the characters on board your train, you have to leave that all behind.
We'll get you out! Whoa! It's Artyom! Artyom? Artyom! What the hell?
So as Artyom, your journey takes you to multiple locations, and the range is absolutely brilliant. You've got murky radiated swamplands, dusty scorched oil fields, and suspicious underground facilities. It's not only the range of these landscapes that's impressive, but graphically, it all looks great. There are a few technical glitches here and there, but nothing major at all. It holds up really well. The wide open vistas, the forest and desert sections especially, can be breathtaking. The way that Exodus presents itself has to be commended. There is an eerie beauty to behold in Metro's ghostly and atmospheric world, something that isn't comparable to a lot of other games. I think a special mention has to go to the lighting in the game, because it absolutely makes it. The way it provides respite in dark situations, and then its absences create real anxious tension, is brilliant. Day and night cycles actively alter the world and the behaviour of your enemies, whilst rain and sandstorms can completely change combat scenarios. One moment early in the game sees you canoeing into a dilapidated warehouse, and the sun flickers at you hauntingly through the twisted beams. It was a moment that encapsulated Metro's world for me and its characters, an overwhelmingly hostile place, but one that still held glimmers of hope and humanity. The train works as a plot progression device, literally transporting you from stage to stage. It works as your home too, filled with friends and allies that you'll carry out missions with, chat to, and complete optional tasks for. There are numerous stops that you make on your journey, all offering something different, but can be more or less categorised into mini open world sections and more traditional linear missions, although they try to hide that sometimes. The open world isn't the best, mainly quite bland and lacks the passive storytelling that great open worlds have. It's largely just a few extra outposts of baddies to kill. But with ammunition and supplies scarce, it doesn't feel like there's a huge benefit to dealing with them. You'll be rewarded with a collectible or suit upgrade for your troubles. Both major open world sections end with a bombastic set-piece finale, which brings together the various missions that have taken place nicely. You'll meet a range of characters on your travels, and some may become members of your crew. I personally found this probably to be the weakest part of the whole game. It's not that they were terrible, there are a couple of memorable characters and parts of the game where they're used really well, but mainly they just blend and fade into the background. They do seem interchangeable and expendable. Most of them I wouldn't have even noticed if they'd gone, never mind died. Some stayed and some left, due to decisions I made during particular sections, but these mostly felt pretty flimsy. Like I hadn't ticked enough obscure boxes, rather than down to any tangible choices I made.
Armored trolleys, and when those were taken out, they blew the tunnel up.
As well as there being a great range of settings, there's also a huge range of different enemies. Both mutated monsters and more conventional human foes have lots of variation, posing new challenges to overcome constantly. And I think I'll keep coming back to this word, range, when it comes to Metro Exodus, because I think of everything, it's what it does really well. You see it a lot with really average to bad first-person shooters, where you're doing the same thing, rinse and repeat over and over, the same settings, the same obvious sets of cover. But in Metro, you're always being asked to mix it up and play in different ways. Sometimes it's stealth, sometimes it's run and gun, sometimes you'll have the choice to do either one. Sometimes you have to defend a moving platform, and sometimes you'll have to navigate through a section, avoiding or not patrolling foes. I think my favourite part of the gameplay came from Returning Creature, one that forces you to be clever about the way you use light in the dark, cramped tunnels. Although it has really gone through a massive change from its first two iterations, from its linear tunnels and few jaunts above ground, it still does host these underground sections as well as it ever did, but instead of being 90% of the game, losing their effect you might argue, they are now dispersed so well across the game that when they appear they make so much more of an impact. You have to adapt on the fly to the changing environments as they pose different challenges. Every time I found myself back underground, I almost felt like I had to reteach myself how to do it. But I liked that, the feeling that I never quite knew what my next trial would be, always being kept on my toes. To help combat these changing circumstances, you have a real nice crafting system to use. So you have two main resources that you find throughout the game, these being shown by the symbols of a science beaker and a cog. Throwable weapons and ammunition cost more of the cogs, and things like health kits and mask filters cost more of the science beakers. It's a real streamlined crafting system that's exactly as complicated as it needs to be. During a mission you have your big rucksack and you can use it to craft certain things on the fly, edit scopes and attachments to suit your need. The full crafting is available to you at your hubs and usually in the train. It gives a good balance because it forces you to decide which weapons you're going to take and what style, but still allows some wiggle room whilst you're on mission, swapping out day and night scopes for example. Gunplay, as I mentioned before, is a little rugged. The systems and networks that used to run the world are run down, and so too are your weapons. You make the choices to bring old world weapons with higher accuracy, or cobble together new world guns that pack a bigger punch or kick like hell, but it all fits really well with the game's aesthetic. Everything in the game is a bit clunky. It's not the laser precision of Call of Duty. You can really feel the dirt and grunge weighing down your weaponry, toxic wind through the cracks of your gas mask. Overall, Metro Exodus offers more than its previous games. The brave decision to emerge above ground pays off. The expanded Metro world offers a fresh take on the franchise, taking the rare step of changing something before it's stale, rather than out of necessity. You're discovering the world at the same pace as Artyom, genuinely having no idea what is around the next corner of the train track. It leaves behind its supernatural aspects, but retains most of what sets the franchise apart from other first-person shooters. Tense atmospheres, a survivalist feel, and rugged combat keep all the polish off to its benefit, while streamlined crafting and upgrade mechanics give a couple jagged edges a tune-up. The plot lacks a little, the story being very much one of a journey rather than destination, which falls slightly flat. Characters presented in a way that dictates you have to care about them, rather than compelling you to truly do so. All in all, I give Metro Exodus a 7.5.